The story of the kings and queens of England is more surprising than you might think. It's a fine drama, 1,000 years of tales of lust and betrayal, of heroism and cruelty, of mysteries, murders, tragedies, and triumphs.
Hi everybody, and welcome to this new episode of Queens and Kings of England. So, today we will see another episode of the Augustan Age. What we call Augustan Age goes from 1702, the beginning of Queen Anne's reign that we have already studied, and goes on under George I, and it ends after the death of George II. So in the Augustan Age that goes from 1702 until 1760, we have three monarchs: Anne, George I, and George II. Is it called so because this time is it has been generally regarded as a golden age? Like the period of Roman history under the Emperor August, which had achieved political stability and power, as well as flourishing of the arts. The important features of the Augustan Age are the colonial expansion, especially after the 7 Years' War, when Britain won the control of Quebec. Quebec was the French part of Canada, and then Britain won the control of the whole territory of Canada, and on the east side, the control of India. Then political stability, and it's also for this reason, the political stability and the colonial expansion, that this period was named after the Roman Emperor August. Then we have the rise of the middle classes, with the importance of coffee houses as meeting places for intellectuals, the spread of journalism and newspapers. We have the beginning of parliamentary monarchy with a two-party system, Tories and Whigs. The spirit of enlightenment. There is an intellectual movement which began in England in the 17th century with the philosopher Locke, and then spread to Germany with the philosopher Kant, and then also to the rest of Europe. With a new faith in reason, central role of man, scientific inquiries, feeling of tolerance and equality. So, in the last episode, the Stuart dynasty, by the way, I say dynasty because I pronounce it with an American accent, so you can say dynasty with American English or dynasty in British English. So, I said that the Stuart dynasty or dynasty ended with the death of Queen Anne, the Protestant daughter of James II, and the Hanover dynasty began with George I in 1714. He was German and Protestant. George I became king when he was 54. When he came to England for his coronation, he knew that he will not have the same power than his predecessors. In fact, he will be almost powerless. So for him, it was not important that he could not speak English. At the opening of Parliament, King George stood in silence while his words were read by the Lord Chamberlain. The fact that he was not speaking English and that he wasn't interested in the country that he was ruling, for example, he spent most of the years of his reign outside from England in Hanover, made him a very unpopular king. Basically, he left the government to his ministers. His own work was done by a new figure, the Prime Minister, a politician acting as a king's substitute. The first man to take on this role was Thomas Walpole. Walpole was a Whig. He was coming from the gentry class, and he was first elected to the Parliament in 1701 under Queen Anne, and held many senior positions before to become the Prime Minister de facto. Walpole was one of the greatest politicians in British history. He played a significant role in sustaining the Whig Party. He also ensured the Hanoverian succession, and he defended the principles of the Glorious Revolution. It seemed that established the stable political supremacy for the Whig Party that we still have today. Another curiosity about him is that he is the father of Horace Walpole, the writer who wrote the first Gothic novel, which is The Castle of Otranto. Anyway, we remember him especially because during his career he was against the military expenses, and instead he promoted trades. So this helped a lot the British economy. And on the side of the people, he restored some trust in the government and what was the kingdom. Also, he succeeded to lower land taxes, and so he was very popular. But at a certain moment, he had his decline because he was accused of corruption by his opponents. The king gave him a townhouse in Downing Street, and still now this house is the official residence of the British Prime Minister in London.
The Right Honourable Member of Parliament, Mr. Robert Walpole.
Your Majesty, I bring grave news, I'm afraid. The company we set up to profit from slave trading in South America has, it seems, been promising rather more than it can deliver. Without firm action, this crisis could well spell the end for both of us.
Was ist das?
Your English seems to have got worse again, Your Majesty.
Was?
Have you been back over to Germany again?
Ja. Ich liebe Deutschland, ja.
Yes, I know you love Germany. Some would say, for an English king, you spend rather too much time there.
Was?
Nothing. We have a bit of a crisis.
Ja.
I'd like to help solve the crisis, but I don't have enough power.
Ja.
Do you understand me, or are you just repeating the word yes in German?
Ja.
Your Majesty, you cannot make this problem just go away simply by repeating yes after everything I say. Now I think about it. Would you like me to solve the crisis for you?
Ja.
And would you be willing to make me First Lord of the Treasury and Chancellor of the Exchequer? Basically making me in charge of the entire country. A sort of Prime Minister?
Was?
No, the other word.
Ja.
That's the one. Well, thank you very much. If you wouldn't mind just signing there, make it all official. Wonderful. Well, that's that then. While I think about it, would it be okay for the country to buy me a nice big house? You know, as Prime Minister?
No problem.
Oh, did you understand that? Or are you just saying some English words you remembered?
No problem?
Yep, thought as much.
Auf Wiedersehen.
On the social side, there was more social mobility for the middle classes, but for the lower classes, there were still problems of poverty. So alcoholism, especially with gin, and minor crimes were common. In 1729, a new religious movement called Methodism was founded by Charles Wellesley, and this movement was promoting respectability, moral dignity, temperance, and also the importance to help the poor. So they were offering services such as free Sunday school to teach people to read and to write through the reading of the Bible. So for the people that they didn't have means to afford education. For British nobility and wealthy landed gentry, so for the rich classes, it started the phenomenon of the Grand Tour, which is the ancestor of what today we call tourism, and that it was not existing before. The Grand Tour was a 17th, 18th century custom of a traditional trip of Europe undertaken by rich upper class young European, so from England, France, or Germany, and they were most of the time accompanied by a chaperone, such as a family member. And this started when they had come of age. To have come of age, it means that they were about 21 years old. Only men were allowed to do the Grand Tour, and for women it started in the beginning of the 20th century. And so for them it was more a voyage to Italy with for example, with an aunt as a chaperone, and became too part of the upper class women's education, like in the book A Room with a View of Forster. But anyway, this custom, now only for men, it was associated with a standard itinerary, and it was a sort of educational rite of passage. By the mid of the 18th century, the Grand Tour had become a regular feature of aristocratic education in Central Europe. And they were traveling to see the art and culture, those that they are considered the roots of Western civilization, especially the cultural legacy of classical antiquity and Renaissance. It was an occasion also to learn or to perfect their foreign languages, especially French, because French in this time it was the language that you needed for diplomacy. Still today is the language of diplomacy, but now to travel we use more English. At the time it was French. Also for them was a possibility to view specific works of art, or to have the chance to hear a certain kind of music. You have to imagine that in this time they didn't have the media that we have today, so to see a reproduction, even a reproduction of a work of art, it was not that easy. You needed to have a copy, so these people that they had the possibility, they were going to see museums and so important works of art. Also, it was not existing the recording, so the only chance that they had to listen to a certain kind of music was to travel. This Grand Tour also could last from several months or even several years. The most common itinerary of the Grand Tour, usually for the English people, I mean, usually began in Dover. So from there, they were crossing the English Channel, and they were going in France to Paris. Of course, Paris was considered a sophisticated city, and it was also an occasion to learn French manners of French high society, including courtly behavior and fashion. This also was a mean for young men to polish their manners and to prepare for a leadership position at home, often in government or in diplomacy. So after France, they were going to Switzerland, often in Geneva, and then they were crossing the Alps, and once in Italy, they were going to Turin, sometimes Milan, and then an important place was Florence. In Florence, there was even a considerable Anglo-Italian society that was accessible to traveling Englishmen. Then they were going to Venice, Bologna, Padua, and Rome. Often the voyage was finishing, the journey was finishing in Naples. Naples was a famous city to study music, and later in after the middle of the 18th century, it was also the place where they could see the recent discover of Herculaneum and Pompeii, the archaeological sites. Also later, the more adventurers might attempt even Greece itself, but normally Naples or Paestum was the usual terminus. During these trips, also there were commissioned paintings, buying work of art, and thanks to the Italian influence, the Palladian style became fashionable in British architecture. Also, a little curiosity about the Grand Tour is that, of course, the word tourism comes from the Grand Tour, and also the word that we still use, that is souvenir, to mean a little thing that we bring from a trip, comes also from the fact that people were buying stuff to bring home that was typical from the countries that they were visiting. And so this was a souvenir. Souvenir in French means to remember, what we call in Italian un ricordo, un ricordino di viaggio. So they were bringing these objects home, and that's how started also the market of souvenirs. Even the postcards were born like this, because when there were these travelers, they were seeing works of art. Sometimes they were commissioning paintings or drawings to show home the reproduction of this kind of work of art, and then they were sending them home. More and more they took this use, and then the big paintings became smaller and smaller until the point that they became postcards. Now we don't send postcards anymore, but it was a common use until 20 years ago. So thanks for watching. Study page 118, and especially this video, and goodbye.